Shannon, and then Lindsay. Thank you, Lindsay. I appreciate that. All right, you guys. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. Lindsay is going to go ahead and drop the presentation link into the chat box for you. And then also the session is being recorded for anyone who wants to go back and take a look at this, or others that aren't able to be with us today can take a look at this brief overview. And so hopefully by now you guys are all familiar with the Regional Secondary Transition website, and that is where the presentation and the recording for today will be housed, under the Regional Secondary Transition, and then go to SPP Indicator 13. So really briefly, here are some of our objectives, or our objectives for today. We're going to be flying through, probably spending about 35, 40 seconds on each slide. Because as I was telling some of the participants that came in, there's not really a lot that's new about SPP Indicator 13, but we just want to see if you guys get you up to date, because this is something we only do once a year. And then, of course, always be able to answer your questions at the end of the presentation. So feel free to drop those in as we're going through. Pam and I are going to be monitoring that. And just so that everyone knows, I guess I should have introduced myself. I'm Carla Johnson. I'm the Regional Secondary Transition Consultant here at ESC Region 11. And with me this afternoon is Pam Humphrey, who is one of our liaisons, one of our TEA liaisons, and she'll tell you a little bit more about her in just a few seconds. All right, so the resources, these are hot links, and so you do have the presentation dropped in the chat for you, and TEA always updates the primary, I like to call them primary resource documents, with the current year's data collection date and year. So everything that you have, or all of the documents that you will, primary resource documents that you will be using, should have a date of maybe February of 2021, or maybe even March of 2021. All right, I'm going to just launch a very brief poll for you guys. Humor me, please. What do you guys know about SPP Indicator 13? Go ahead and select which of the following answers best identifies what State Performance Plan Indicator 13 is all about. Give you guys about 15 seconds to do that. What is State Performance Plan Indicator 13 all about? Okay, well, there's just a few of us in. I'm going to go ahead and end the polling and share the results with you guys. So that's why we do this refresher, okay? Because SPP Indicator 13 is not about post-secondary goals. That's what Indicator 14 is about. 14 is measuring those post-school outcomes. It's not a performance indicator, because that's also what Indicator 14 is all about. Indicator 13 is a 100% compliance indicator. And so thank you guys for participating in the little poll. All right, so let's get into it. Here's just some general information about State Performance Plan. We've been doing this for a long time, you guys, and I'm not going to spend all this time reading the slides to you because you have this information, but basically all of the indicators illustrate how the states are going to continuously improve upon transition services, and Indicator 13 is one of those things that gives districts and charter schools an opportunity to look at the transition services that they're providing to the youth that they serve, and continuously improve those services on an annual basis. So there's that slide that looks at who are we really talking about. We're talking about the percentage of 16-year-olds. This is a federal requirement. We're looking at the percentage of 16-year-olds and above with an IEP that include appropriate measurable post-secondary goals that are annually updated based on any age-appropriate transition assessments, transition services, including a course of study that are going to reasonably enable that student to reach their goals. And it's also about annual IEP goals related to the student's transition services needs. And so that's the first part. But then when we go on over, the federal requirement also tells us that all of our IEPs for our students must include evidence that the student was invited to the IEP meeting. And of course, if appropriate, a representative of any participating agency was invited to participate in the IEP team meeting with the consent of the parents and or that student who has reached the age of majority. All right, so we're just going to go ahead and walk through, like I said, on that first, second, third slide that I had. If you have that checklist, if you want to click on that link and pull it up, we're just going to walk through briefly what those 8 items are that you're identifying for SPP Indicator 13. And I want you guys to remember, again, this is a compliance indicator in the state of Texas. We began transition planning or address transition planning at age 14. But for this federal requirement, we're looking at those students who are age 16 and above. It's important to remember that if one of your folders is out of compliance, then it makes the entire state out of compliance. Okay, so let's take a look at what items we're looking at. So item number 1 on your checklist says, are there appropriate measurable post-secondary goals in the areas of training, education, employment, and where appropriate, independent living skills? Okay, and then on the right-hand side of your screen, you can see what your sources of information is. Each student is required to have post-secondary goals in the areas of training, education, and employment. So we just want to make sure that all transition age youth have those post-secondary goals identified, okay? Item number 2, are the post-secondary goals updated annually? And again, your sources of documentation where you can find this information as you're reviewing the folders is our documentation. And it's important to remember that as students progress through high school, their goals may or may not change. And so that's why we want to make sure that we are addressing this annually to see if there's been any changes to those post-secondary goals. And then, of course, just making sure that that update or that tweak to that post-secondary goal is always updated. Is there evidence that measurable post-secondary goals were based on appropriate transition assessments? Notice that there's an S at the end of assessments. So I know that you guys realize that we've been having tons of workshops on the tag, and some of you are actually signed up or actually attended last week for the self-determination internet assessment assessment. We just want you guys to know that there are tons and tons of assessments out there, and you should be looking very closely at your students very individually, and also using the data that you currently have available in their folders to help those students realize and the families realize those students' strengths and their areas of challenge, and connect that to their post-secondary goals. Item number 4, are there transition services in the IEP that will reasonably enable the student to meet his or her post-secondary goals? And so we know that with transition services, it could be related services, I'm going to use my cheat sheet on that one. We want to be able to look at the instruction, the development of employment skills, related skills, their community experiences, all of those can be looked at as transition services. So we want to make sure that we're at least addressing those and then including those in those IEPs as we go through. And on the right-hand side, again, is where you can find your sources of information in your folder reviews. Item number 5, do the transition services include courses of study that will reasonably enable the student to meet his or her post-secondary goals? That 4-year, 6-year plan, the personal graduation plans, making sure that our students have, or the families and the students have declared those endorsements and are enrolled in the courses that are going to help them attain that endorsement, et cetera. So there are your sources again. Then item number 6, is there or are there annual IEP goals related to the students' transition services? We know federal law tells us that we need to have at least one annual goal that's related to the transition services needs, and sources of information can again be those the assessment data, including age-appropriate transition assessments, and this should also be documented in the IEP. Pam, I'm kind of flying through these. If there's anything that you think of that I might be leaving out, please feel free to jump in. All right, item number 7, is there evidence that the student was invited to the IEP meeting where transition services were discussed? So we want to make sure that our notice of ARD meeting actually shows that the family was invited and the student was also invited to participate in the meeting. Item number 8, if appropriate, is there evidence that a representative of any participating agency was invited to the ARD committee meeting with the prior consent of the parent and or that student who has reached the age of majority? So your sources of information to be able to document that this indeed did happen, you can see there on the right-hand side as well. All right. So I mentioned just one or two new things that Pam and I felt would be important to help make some connections to the TEA cyclical reviews that are going on and how that information that is being collected connects very closely to State Performance Plan Indicator 13. So Pam, do you want me to just click through it for you?
Yes.
Okay.
I put nod in my head and talking. Good.
Okay.
Okay, so what has occurred is that TEA, part of their corrective action plan, TEA is monitoring all districts throughout the state, and every district is on an LEA, be it charter or ISD, are on a 6-year cycle. Some districts and some charter have already gone through the first cyclical review. Last year was a practice run. Now this year it's been the official. And so right now, directors, if they have not completed, they're doing the self-assessment for their districts. And so with the practice run, transition was the most cited area for non-compliance. And so when we look at what they're looking at under transition, it's actually all of transition. And the first one, although it does not, it doesn't really deal with indicator 13, but the first one, that transition began at age 14. So the first one was probably the most cited one at the beginning because there was not documentation showing that the first transition meeting was started at age 14. And then the second one that was a little bit more I'm not sure it was more problematic, but a little bit problematic was when we start talking about functional vocational evaluation. And I always like to tell people, the people who are monitoring don't have a real in-depth knowledge of transition. So that's why good documentation is important. So if you decided not to do functional vocational evaluation, make sure you document why it's not, that is why it's not needed, as opposed to saying it's just not needed. You know, there's what's the rationale for not doing it? Uh, and then when we start looking at consent, one thing with this one is that on SPP 13, it's a consent question. Did you get consent to invite the agency? But when you go through the monitoring process for the cyclical review, they focus more on the agency participation. So you want to make sure if you invited agencies that it's documented. If you did not invite an agency, you document why you did not invite an agency. And you don't want to say, well, one's not needed. No, give the rationale, once again, give the rationale why it's not needed. Um, then, and if you have that, then you can get through the review fairly easily. And then we're going on to the next one, the 16-year-old. Now we're starting the federal requirements. Okay, Carla, I'm ready. So when you look at the federal requirement, this one it kind of falls apart a little bit because they go line by line. So they look at, so what needs to be in place at, when a student turns 16. One, the transition began, the federal requirement did it begin. Are post-secondary goals identified in the ARD paperwork? And it's really about your IEP paperwork, because part of this process is that, when part of the review is TA will send a list to directors on the type of folders, the type of IEPs they want to see, not the name of the student, just the type. So if they say we want to see 4 transition age IEPs, you want to make sure one of those IEPs are for a 14-year-old student. And then you want to make sure when you get to that 16-year-old requirement, then you're going to look at this and say, okay, what are the post-secondary goals? Are the post-secondary goals identified in the paperwork, in the IEP documentation? Are there transition assessments? And this one, transition assessments got hit hard the first go around as well. And I think part of the reason was because although students may have had transition assessments, they were not documented in the IEP. The results were not documented. So it doesn't do you well to have IEP, do transition assessment if you're not including that information somewhere in the IEP. Someone said, well, can we just upload it into our special ed management system? And yes, you can do that. But you want to make sure if you're not uploading it, that you are documenting either in deliberations or somewhere within your IEP documents that which transition assessment we're giving and what were the results of that assessment. And that's the same thing with if you do an interest inventory, the same thing. Kids receive interest inventory, and these are the three areas which you identify is his or her interests. Okay, and then and this one was fine, just making sure that you're uploading, that you're continuously reviewing the transition part, and the students are participating. And also the course of study. That was another one that districts got cited on. And I think it more had to do with what were they using for the course of study? Are they using the personal graduation plan? Are they developing a separate course of study? You just want to make sure whatever you're doing, you're consistent with whatever you're doing, and that it's clearly there. And then the age of majority, and a lot of districts got cited on the age of majority, and I've with that transfer of rights, because some districts don't, they don't see that as part of the transition process, but it is included in the transition. And so you want to make sure whoever's sending out the notice for the transfer of rights, that is documented within the IEP, that notice has been sent out, and the parent as well as the adult student have received that transfer of rights. So why is, you might say, okay, Pam, so what does this have to do with us today? Because we're just talking about SPP 13. Well, what's going to happen is TA is going to eventually do a crosswalk between SCP 13 and then what they see on site when they do cyclical review. So when they review folders, they're going to say, okay, District A or Charter School B, you said you were in 100% compliance when you're self-reporting. Let's see if that's true. And there's where the crosswalk begins. Because finally they're going to say, okay, you said you're 100% compliance. We're going to look at these IEPs that you sent us, and you get to select the IEPs. That's what I tell people. You know, each LEA's district charter gets to select their IEPs. So you select the best IEPs you feel like you have that represent transition, and you said you're in compliance, but we look at it and we cannot find transition assessments, you know, as the review team, or we can't find the kids' post-secondary goals. That's where the conversation comes in. That's going to be the piece that's now generated. I don't know if it's going to start next school year, the 21-22 school year, but this is the track where they're going, is that they're looking at the areas where districts are doing self-reporting, and then they're going to, if they're up for cyclical review, which means now you're going to be engaging with the agency, with TEA staff, they're going to look at how did you rate yourself, and then look at your IEPs and see if those two things are meshing. So that's why it's important this year as you do your SPP, you know, you do your reporting, you're reviewing those folders, that you clearly can look at it and say, yes, those the 8 items that we're reporting on, we're there. They're all there, no problem. But if you look at it and you say, okay, I'm not sure that's there, or you see some patterns of inconsistencies, then you want to document. One, you want to correct them too, but you also want to document them because you want to figure out what's going on. You know, especially if you're dealing with multiple campus. At campus A might be right on, doing exactly, you know, way you guys are training. Campus B might have gone far off from the left field and start doing something totally different. So you want to make sure that you're identifying if there's any area that's problematic, and then you think about how are you going to address it. You know, we can get the folders, as I tell people, it's easy to get IEPs into compliance. The hardest thing is getting people practice aligned so they stay in compliance, if that makes sense. So that's really what Carla wanted me to talk to you all about today. And if you
Thank
have any
you.
questions, you know where to find me.
Absolutely. And thank you, Pam.
Yeah.
I always appreciate you giving us that connecting piece. And which brings me to another piece. You know, it's such a small group. You guys can feel free to email me or Pam if there are some specific topics for upcoming school year that might help you to strengthen these various parts and pieces, not only for the desk review, but also for State Performance Plan Indicator 13. So, all right, let's see, what did I do? Now we're there. All right, so let's talk really briefly about how you get your teal user access. Now, it's important for you guys to know that SPP Indicator 14 is reported through the TSDS portal, and that happened, that begins this summer, and then again in the, you know, there's reports that are being done in the fall, and then that final submission for SPP Indicator 14 happens, I believe, that third week of February on an annual basis. So just to remind you of that. But for SPP Indicator 13, that data is still collected through TEAL, all right? Now, rumor has it that eventually 13 is also going to be reported in TSDS, but it hasn't happened. So we're just going to keep proceeding with how we've been doing business in TEAL. So let's take a look at what that really means. Now, if you are a new person, I know there was one or two folks on today who had indicated they were new. If you have not applied for your TEAL, and that actually stands for Texas Education something login. I can't even
Agency.
agency. Okay,
That's
there you
all it is.
go. Texas Education Agency login.
I know it's complicated.
Yes, it's real tough, especially today. But anyway, you will go to the TEA homepage, and then this is where you would log in if you already have a username and a password. If you do not, then I'm going to show you what needs to be done on that here in just a moment. And then also just to let you know, while I'm here on this screenshot, everyone should be referring. I had a question the other day from Texas Workforce Commission VR, and they wanted to know how do you have a master list of all the transition specialists in Region 11? So I had to reply back and let them know, no, I do not have a master list, but TEA has made it very clear that all of our transition and employment designees should be listed in Ask TED. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, email me and I can walk you through that process. Something for you guys to kind of be thinking about over the summer. If you're new and your name isn't in that spot when you click on Ask TED, you want to make sure that you get with your special ed director and the person that manages the Ask TED for your district, usually superintendents, administrator, or assistant, they handle that. And so we want to make sure that every single year that information is current, because this is where the entire state of Texas and anybody else and beyond can find the transition employment designee. Okay, so moving forward, if you do not have a teal login, if you're that person that's on this call today, you just want to make sure that you are applying for access. And you also go to the Texas Education Agency Secure Applications here in teal. You're going to scroll down to SPP 13 or any other indicator that you might be responsible for capturing data for. You select all of those indicators and then click on the request access link that's on this page. And that whole process will begin with, I think, maybe your special ed director, and then approval will go to the superintendent, and then they will be sending you a login, a username and a password for you to use to log in with. All right. So as you are applying for this role for any of the indicators, you have to select what role is it that you're going to play. And these are the different roles, just so you guys can be reminded. You have a certifier, you have a data entry agent. We have we have an ESC viewer, and that's exactly and only what Pam and I can be. So a lot of times when you guys are going through and doing your folder reviews, you'll give us a call and you'll say, you know, I can't do this or I can't do that. We have limited access to what we can actually see. And so sometimes we'll just want to drill down and have you be a little bit more specific on the page so that we can help you or provide you with technical assistance, because we have a ESC viewer role, which is somewhat limited. For SPP 14, we're not going to even talk about that. There's a downloader request, TEA administrator, TEA viewer, but you're going to select what role it is that you are playing in this data collection process. And once you have selected your role, you're going to click continue. That's what that page actually looks like. All right, so you're going to select, like I said, some of you guys do it all. You do SPP indicator 7, 11, 12, 13, and 14. So depending on what your role is going to be and which of the applications you're going to be responsible for, you'll just be making those selections there. Let's see, that's a little bit closer screenshot of that. All right, so then you've applied, your superintendent, your special ed director, they've approved your access to Teal so that you can get in there and start entering the data for those students that have been selected or that will be used in this year's data collection process. So know that this is kind of what the, well, with the exception of 14, this is what the screen actually looks like when you log in using your username and password. This is actually the home page, the main page, application page. And notice that SPP Indicator 14 is the one that should have the X, please forgive me, should have the X over it, because remember that information is now being submitted through TSDS. Okay, and this is another screenshot of how you can actually go in and run reports. Now, if you are a new person and you're saying, my goodness, Carla, I just got to this district, or I'm just starting to do this, I just got my username and password, how would I ever know what students the data had been collected for those students previously? Well, know that you can go in to the reports tab and run reports from, I believe it's the last 3 years. Am I right, Pam? I don't have it pulled up, but I believe for the last 3 years, you can pull up, run reports from the last 3 data collection periods. And I can confirm that timeline at a later
Yeah, I
time.
think so.
I think it is 3 years. But at any rate, you're just gonna go in and click on SPP Indicator 13, and these are the different ways that you can pull your reports. You know, you can do a district report by campus, a regional report by district by campus, a statewide report by district, and a statewide report by district by campus. And I think on the next screen, we give you a little screenshot of what that looks like. Here's a better view. So those are those steps that the PowerPoint actually gives you the steps for running that report. Step 1, you select from the drop down the year that you were wanting to select that data for or run that report for. Select your district, select your campus, or select all of your campuses, and then run the report. It really is pretty simple. And then this is what you're actually going to see. This is just a little screenshot. This one was taken from one of our neighboring school districts, and the little symbols there are blocking out student identifiable student information. So that's why that is there. But when you go ahead and you put in your district and all those parts and pieces of information, this is the kind of report that you will get. You'll be able to see who the students were, what their date of birth was or is, and their grade levels, if it's in a complete status, whether that student's folder was in compliance, et cetera. So you can also print this report. So I just wanted to, we always like to just kind of give you guys some screenshots so you kind of know what you're getting ready to go into. Now, we talked a little bit about selecting those roles. If you are just now this year applying for access for any of the SPP indicators, these are the different roles that you would have to select from. The district data entry agent or district or the district certifier will enter the data collectively when necessary into Teal. There is only one district certifier per LEAs and SSAs. The superintendent must revoke previous certifier's rights in order to give a new person that role. So again, if you are a new person and this is going to be your first year, you'll need to visit with your special ed director, and she will work with the superintendent to revoke that person's rights that might have been entering the data last year, and then help you get yourself set up so that you can be that person. Now, the district certifier is responsible for ensuring that the data that's entered is accurate and therefore must be knowledgeable about the transition process and those 8 items that we reviewed in the checklist. So The district certifier will also certify the data once it's entered and completed. And then the district certifier will need to read and certify that the information that they are attesting to, sorry, I have someone in the waiting room. The information about the data collection that they are entering into the system is accurate and as accurate as can be. And that is checked off in what's called a data integrity checklist for indicator 13. And there's actually one for all of the indicators. So that's a hyperlink that'll take you to what that data integrity checklist actually looks like. Okay, so let's talk about how that looks. So if you have your checklist in front of you, I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through this or any of the other supporting documents. It clearly outlines that you guys are collecting data for those students that must be at least 16 between July 1st of 2020 and June the 30th of 2021. It includes students up through age 21 or age 22 as appropriate, and it does include those students who are age 15 but will turn 16 by June 30th of this year. All right, so the window for all this data collection is happening, it opened on April the 1st and it'll actually close on August the 13th of 2021. We hope that you guys are doing what you did last year. I mean, it was incredible. You guys did a lot of hard work before leaving or coming off contract for this school year. So we didn't have a lot of phone calls and a lot of emails that we had to send out to districts to remind them about this compliance indicator. So we hope that you guys will start this process very early on before you're off contract so that we're not calling you guys on August the 13th at 8 a.m. and saying, you guys, your data is due today, because once you miss it, you miss it, okay? And this is a hyperlink to the entire SPP data collection schedule for all the SPPs for the timelines. All right. So once you, once you have gone through the process of determining who your students are that are going to be, you're going to be collecting data that meet that criteria. And TEA has also given all school districts a formula to follow. If you're a district that serves this many students, or I think I may be getting ready to talk about that here in just a minute, but the required sampling procedure is what we're going to be reviewing here in just a minute. But once you've generated that list of students that meet that criteria, that's your official list. It's complete. And then that's when you would be getting yourselves prepared to go over into TEAL and enter the data for those students. Okay. So districts must be able to show the documentation of how they determine the minimum number of students that of student folders that they would be reviewed. And again, TEA gives us that formula in one of those primary resource documents. And then you must also keep the alphabetized list. So hard copy, please always try to maintain those for a certain number of years. And then that way, a new person can always refer back to a hard copy, or again, remember that you can go into the system and do a report, but I think it only goes back for 3 years, okay? So for audit purposes, always keep track of the folders that you're actually reviewing. All right, so you're going to start your generation of your student list. Districts will generate a list of students with for students with disabilities from all the campuses with enrolled students that meet the criteria. Once the list of students is generated, you're going to place those names in alphabetical order, remove from the list all the students whose data was previously collected. So again, that's why that feature in teal is very important, being able to look at what students did we already collect data on, and also those hard copies if you've maintained those on a yearly basis, taking a look, and you're going to remove any of those students whose information has already been submitted once. Now, what's left over from that list is your official list, and districts will follow, and TEA gives you, again, another formula, which is in your primary resource documents. You're going to follow option 1, option 2, or option 3 as described on the next slide. Okay, so option 1 is for a district with less than 10 students on the official list. Option 2 is for districts with between 10 and 29 students on the official list. And then option 3 is for districts with 30 or more students on the official list. Each option has a specific sampling procedure. And so again, you have a hyperlink there. And then also in the very beginning of the presentation where all the primary resource documents were listed, you have that sampling procedure to refer to as well. All right, so now it's time to enter your data. As we said, this was probably another new piece of information all these years, and I do mean all these years we've been collecting data, and districts were not able to get their data to go through, and they'd be calling us and saying, I don't know what I've done, I've entered it and I can't get it to go through. And then we used to say, well, you can only use Internet Explorer. Well, now the TEA application developers are telling us we no longer have to use Internet Explorer. In fact, the preferred browser is Firefox or Chrome. Go figure. So that's a good piece of information, and that should help prevent you guys from having hiccups as we sometimes did have in the past. All right. So you're going to sign into your teal account. You're going to, we've kind of already said this, so it's a little bit redundant. Use the data collection checklist for each student on that final list of students and enter that data into teal. Contact your district certifier, whoever that is, and let them know, hey, the information that I've already submitted for SPP Indicator 13, it's done, I verified it, it's ready for you to certify, and then we're ready to do a final submission. Very important piece. Certify and final submission, okay? Sometimes districts forget to do that two-step dance, if you will. Okay. Some LEAs do not have these, have to certify data if you do not have secondary schools listed in ASTED. And then also if you have schools that are in ASTED, but you don't have any students that meet that data collection requirement that's as outlined in the primary resource documents, you still have to say, hey, I've gone through, I've checked, and I am certifying that we don't have any students that meet this criteria, and we don't have any data to submit, okay? So we have to make sure we do all of those things as well. So there are 2 steps for that final submission. As I just mentioned, you're first going to submit that data, and then you breathe. Ooh, that's done. And then we have to make sure that that data is certified and then sent to TEA. Note that districts that do not certify their data through the online teal application will not meet compliance for that indicator, regardless if you submitted or submitted your data. So fingers crossed that we haven't had that happen to anybody. So we just always like to remind you that submit and then certify. All right, let's take a look at some of the most frequently asked questions as we've done this over the years. Same questions that we've always gotten I mean, TA hasn't even had anything to really update on those FAQs. So you have hyperlinked here, and then also on that front page of this presentation where all the primary resource documents are. Which district collects data on students attending a JJAEP program? And then it gives you the answer. The enrolled students district will collect the data for the appropriate JJAEP. Another question that has come up over the years is, what does the data entry agent or certifier do when they cannot get a pet match? That's that unique ID number associated with that student. And then it gives you the answer to please make sure that you check with your PIMS clerk and make sure that the student's TSDS unique ID is entered and confirm that that number is correct. And in addition, check with that PIM coordinator to make sure that the number that you're showing is also correct. And simply making that adjustment, you should be able to hit submit and get the information to move forward. If for whatever reason there is a problem and you just cannot get that unique ID or that pet match, then don't fret. You're just going to go to that master list of students, that official list of students that you have, skip over that student, it's okay, and then go to the next IMP student on the sampling list, okay? So that's been one of the questions that has come up in the past. Let's see what else. All right, we also have a clarification process. TEA did a really nice job of providing an overview of the data. I believe this might have been a new piece of information because when I was looking at this, they made a nice, are you guys able to see this? I can't see anybody, so if someone will just say yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I don't recall this being created last year, but I could be mistaken. But they did a nice little 12-page document that gives you a real nice overview of the data collection clarification period. So once you submit your data on, I believe I just said it was August the 12th or 13th, whatever that final deadline is, then you guys can go back and make a clarification. But don't be confused. It's not one or the other. You submit your data by that closing window, August 13th of 2021, but then you also have the option, and get my mouse to work. You also have the option to clarify the data that you've submitted. Okay, so it tells you right here, after submitting the SPP application, after that close day each year, the Texas Education Agency will offer local LEAs the opportunity to submit updated data for compliance indicators 11, 12, and 13 to correct data entry errors and or to document any correction of potential non-compliance, okay? And then this document does a really nice job of going through and giving you 3 options on how you can, what you need to do and what each of those options actually means. So if you find a non-compliance item, you don't have to do the clarification. You can just do nothing, or you can verify the non-compliance, or you can verify the correction if your district should decide to make a correction, okay? And it goes through and it talks to you in this document about what each of those options is. So I appreciated that, and I think you guys, that'll be a handy tool for you as you're going through, and if you find that you had made some errors after you hit the submit on August the 13th, know that there are some options that are available to you. Pam, is there anything that I might have missed?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
Are there any questions?
Yeah, I'm getting ready to do that as soon as I hit stop record here. Just one second, you guys. Thank you. Let's see here. I'm gonna stop my chair. Fast and furious, I know. But you guys are pros at doing this at this